Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about what happened in Game 5 of the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Vishwanathan Anand. Anand in this game is playing white and Carlsen is playing black. We have an even score up to this point. Let's see what happened in this game. We have a Nimzo Indian turned actually into a Bogo Indian. Nope, a Queen's Indian, I lied. But soon we get a bishop b4 check line of the Queen's Indian where white is pretty much forced to play this bishop d2 move and black decides to retreat. And black's idea is that with the bishop here on the d2 square, this impedes the white development of protecting the d pawn. So often white is pretty much forced to move out the bishop again, and black's idea is that this bishop's not so helpful here. So sometimes white is not necessarily forced to play this bishop d2 move. Anyways, that's black's idea. Bishop g2 and c6. I've seen this move played by Karyak in many games, especially against Aronian and various other players. Karyakin is pretty much the main expert at this line for the black side, I think. Okay, e4 looks pretty natural, d5, and now takes. Instead of e4, actually, I think Aronian has played like something like castles and bishop f4 or something. I can't recall it correctly. In some of their games, they've had multiple games on this line. Very interesting stuff. In knight e5 here. Looks like a pretty normal position where there's this tension across this diagonal. Let's see if I can get this right. Right over here. And white has a very nice knight here in the e5 square, so I think white should be pretty satisfied with this position. Nothing terribly wrong. Black is extremely solid though, and within a few moves I think he's getting a pretty decent position. Castles, castles, and knight c6. He wants to oppose this knight here on the e5 square as soon as possible. Yeah, in this position, I think Anand is making and knowing pretty much a lot of theory in this kind of position. Certainly he could play the bishop out to the f4 square to allow the protection of this pawn right over here. But in this game he just decided to capture on the d5 square. Yeah, I mean pretty much Anand Carlsen decided to take the knight here on e5. There's not that many great options here. I mean, you don't really want to end up taking here when you allow this kind of structure. And white's queen would probably come out to the square. Forgive me for that, guys. I'm just a little bit sick today. Queen g4 to activate the queen. I'm looking at that g7 pawn, and I have a feeling that bishop c8 would be played, and white is doing pretty much probably a little bit better in this kind of position when he certainly has chances to expand on the queen side and play against the d5 pawn, and I like the active placement of this queen more than black's development here in this kind of position. Also, I don't have a mouse today, so this might be a problem as well, but I hope you guys can bear through it. I'll make sure to have my mouse tomorrow, though. In this game, Carlsen decided to capture the knight here on the e5 square. So instead, after this, certainly Anand could have captured the knight here, but I mean, then after knight takes d5, it's pretty much nothing whatsoever for white to get. There's no chances to get an advantage at all. In fact, I would like black actually, since he has no bad pieces, and this white pawn is potentially weak, and white would have to play f4 when another weakness might be happening along this diagonal. So it's nothing that I think I wouldn't mind for black. See if I can get the position, guys. Yeah, I mean, instead of taking the knight, he decided to play d6, and there's a ton of stuff hanging here in this position. This bishop's hanging, this bishop's hanging, and this knight's hanging. So yeah, I mean here, what I guess the main important thing is to realize that this tension over here is probably the the most important unprotected piece in the position, and black is up a piece, so he probably has to give something back. He decided to play knight c6, probably a good move, really. I mean, there's not really an alternative. Notice that, I mean, if you exchange here on g2, white is going to have the in-between move of de5 here, and you know that gains a tempo on the queen, and after bishop takes g2, captures, and now I think king g2. I mean, I would really like white actually in this kind of position with bishop g5 and you know potentially d5 coming. That's pretty okay, I think. Maybe I'm missing something obvious. Probably I'm missing something obvious actually. Of course, I think I am actually. Let's see if I'm right. Yes, I am. Just captures over here is giving white a good game, of course. Takes and takes is pretty much winning for white, right? Yeah, this is definitely better for white, of course. I'm so silly for missing that. So that's just one kind of tactic. So d6. Anyways, Anand, Carlsen decided to drop the knight back. Probably a good move. And after this, captures. And you know this d4 pawn is still hanging after all this, all these trades. So he decides to move out the bishop to the active square g5, where he can potentially take the knight and push the pawn here to get rid of the isolated pawn and activate all these nice pieces that are just waiting to be thrown across and into the d5 and e4 squares here. So after bishop g5, we saw h6. Probably a good move by Carlsen. But after this, I think Anand is making another good move with d5 here. He can also take on f6 actually, and I don't think this is that bad actually. And I think probably after this, Carlsen would have just recaptured, and Anand would have had to bring the queen out to the a4 square. And here, Carlsen probably has to defend the knight here in the c6 square ever since it's hanging. Notice that this bishop is preventing this knight from moving effectively, and a move like knight a5 is not ideal. I think that actually after knight a5 we could see something like this. Something like this potentially happen. Or maybe rook 81, I'm not sure. But something like this potentially happen, and I think white would be pretty happy with this kind of position. I don't know. This doesn't seem that bad for black, but I mean, he'd rather not worry about the the tension. White didn't really want to trade off so much there, so he played d5 instead. And after this, we saw the knight move over to the side, and notice that there's always this tension right here along this diagonal. And white decided to force black to make a concession here by taking here, and I think oh wait, forgive me guys, am I getting the move order wrong? Whatever. We saw queen takes. No, this is not the move. I'm sorry guys, it looks so similar to the game, I think. Dun, dun, dun. First we saw the captures on f6 and after queen takes. Then we saw white capture here, queen takes here. I'm failing so hard at this. Takes. If I can ever get the move order right, this would be awesome. Right, before this capture, my god, I'm doing so bad today. I saw the game too, and I was like looking at it. This is pretty nice for white. Rook e1 first, and after queen f6. Bishop takes. Not bishop takes, knight d5 then. My god, I'm sorry. Going through so many lines and I forgot of them all. Oh, shame on me. You know, white's doing pretty well in this kind of position. It's a symmetrical pawn structure, but he's got the central knight on d5 and this nice bishop right over here. And white probably should be a little bit better in this kind of position. And Carlsen didn't want to deal with this knight at all. I don't know, but I certainly like white in this kind of position. You might also be wondering what's wrong with queen b2 in this kind of position, but the problem is white actually has the strong move rook e2, when all of these squares are pretty much blocked along this diagonal, and queen a3 is the only move. Notice that you don't have queen b5 because of the fork here on the c7 square between your rook and the queen right here, so that's not possible. So rook e2, and instead of queen b5, I think queen a3 is the only move, and white has another strong move, rook e3, to gain another tempo on the queen. And we see that this square is taken. This square is pretty much the only move on c5, and e7 is occupied, and queen d6 is running into knight e7. There's no move over here or along this rank. So again, we see that either queen b2 or queen c5 is the only move. And here, after queen c5, I think white would play rook c1, and the queen is remarkably finding it difficult to find squares. And I mean, a move like knight c4 is not really ending up in a good position because white can take here and really gain a huge attacking position after knight e7, king h8, and the captures of the bishop right over here. Let's see if I can get this right. I don't want to arrow that. I want to get this on the game. Takes. I don't know, rook d8 probably, and move the queen out to an active spot or something. Or maybe bishop d5, I don't know. Takes. Notice that there's always this pin along this diagonal, so that's why black can get away with that. But queen f3 is giving white a really strong game here. I like white actually a lot. I mean, this kind of line is just very dangerous, I think, for black, so it kind of makes sense why he did that. Instead of that, he could also play queen b2, but I think that after this, he would do the pretty strong move rook b1, and the queen is even more out of squares than it was before. So queen takes a2 is the only move, but now rook a1 now is pretty much forcing the following material transformation when the queen has to move somewhere and you sacrifice the exchange temporarily to gain this check. And after the king moves, we again see this theme of two minor pieces against a rook. And you can include the rook in the material balance too, the rooks. And of course white is clearly better here. So that's why black didn't go pawn grabbing. It's a really dangerous business if you go pawn grabbing here. Very deep line though. It's very important to note, to realize that line. So after knight d5, we saw bishop takes d5, and after this, the transition here is pretty much to a queenless, to almost an endgame really, but it's pretty black gets pretty active play here, and even though this knight is offside here, I mean, white should be a bit better in this kind of position, but the activity that black gets is pretty much nice here. Queen f3 is the first move that Anand starts out with. He wants to get a bishop versus knight endgame here in this kind of position. Queens are whatever black's trumps in this kind of position. This is the only active piece at the moment for black, so he decides to take the pawn right here on b2. He decides to centralize the rook. Anand decides to centralize the rook. I really like this move, and I think Carlsen now is making a pretty nice move here. Not sure about its objective value, but I think that after this, he's getting fairly decent play. I think the move was I think queen f6, and white doesn't really have anything better than the captures here on f6. There's no way to really you don't want to keep queens on the board and allow black to potentially activate his knight somehow. I mean, also black is potentially just moving the rook over here and another rook over here eventually. Maybe rook. Yeah, I think that's what black's plan is in this kind of position. So white captures, and at first this looks great for white since he's infiltrating on the 7th rank here with his powerful rooks. But concretely, I don't think Carlsen really cares. He's up a pawn and decides to give it back in this position to activate his pieces with knight c6. And now knight b4 is the threat that white needs to be slightly careful about. In the game, Anand decided to play rook d7, but I think after rook a4, At least he prevents knight b4. I think this might have been a better try to somehow maintain the game flow here, and I think black would have continued, rook d7 followed by rook d8, and should have been okay in this kind of position. But instead of after rook b7, we saw the knight coming to b4, and a bunch of trades happen in this position where takes, takes, takes leads to a symmetrical pawn structure where black has absolutely no problems. It's pretty much a dead draw from here since black is very solid on the king side, and white has no way to attack this pawn structure, especially on the same side of the board when there's like pawns on the same side of the board and black has the knight. There's no way he's going to lose this position. And soon we see that a draw is happening here. I think Anand probably shouldn't have taken this knight. I mean, but it's really hard to make progress here. The knight controls all these key squares that the white rook wants to get to eventually to try to get to these pawn weaknesses over here. But I guess they were both in time trouble. I didn't really follow the game until that closely, so I don't know the time controls, but they might have had a little bit of time. But I think Anand might have probably just wanted the game to be done with after this, and f5, g4, breaking down the pawn structure, rook d2 activating the rook, takes e3, rook here, and now rook e2. Rook f2, king g3. We get trades on both sides of the pawn board, so it's a symmetrical pawn ending and no advantage for any side. So overall, I think a pretty interesting fight. Reminds me of the last game actually, a pretty well balanced draw by both sides. Where I guess in this game Carlsen didn't really have any chances to get an advantage, and Anand just really played well in the opening, had a good opening choice here, and pretty much had a slight advantage with the bishop eventually, bishop versus knight endgame here. I mean, I think another good opening choice by Anand, well played by him to continue the fight here. Clearly, I feel like he's gaining a little bit of momentum here. And then for Carlsen, it's kind of frustrating that you didn't get any kind of advantage or play. I mean, he got a playable position, but it wasn't something he could make a constructive plan out of. And this kind of thing is not desirable, even though it works out. It happens to works out. King g7, by the way, I should have mentioned in this kind of position was designed against the bishop f7 move here. So you've got to be a little bit careful about that if you're black. And after this, I think knight c6 was a good find to see that a few moves beforehand by Carlsen. So, well, a well played draw by both sides. And anyways, guys, I'll be covering Game 6 tomorrow. I'll be following the championship more closely. This is Infinite Flash signing out. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate you doing that. See you around.